If you've ever looked at the data on which populations live the longest, healthiest lives on Earth, you've probably noticed something that most doctors don't talk about. Jewish communities across continents, across centuries, across wildly different climates and cultures consistently appear at the top of longevity research, not just in Israel, where life expectancy currently sits at 83.5 years, placing it among the top 10 nations on the planet, but in Ashkenazi Jewish communities in New York, in Sephardic communities in Morocco, in communities that have survived war, displacement, persecution, and poverty. The longevity follows them wherever they go. And for 40 years, I have been asking one question: why? My name is Dr. Sarah Levine. I was born in Tel Aviv, trained in medicine at Hebrew University of Jerusalem, at Hadassah Medical School. And I have spent 4 decades at the intersection of preventive medicine and the ancestral health practices of my people. But the most important education I ever received did not happen in a lecture hall. It happened in a kitchen in Brooklyn on Friday evenings, watching my grandmother Rachel move through a world that seemed to operate by entirely different rules than the one my colleagues lived in. Rachel Levine was born in Łódź, Poland in 1921. She survived things I cannot put into words. She came to America with nothing. She built a life, and she lived actively, lucidly, independently until she was 98 years old. She never took a single medication until she was past 90, and she never once treated her health as something separate from her faith, her kitchen, her community, or her calendar. To her, those things were all the same thing. When I was 45 years old, my own body began to fail me in ways that my medical training had not prepared me to fix. Chronic fatigue, hormonal disruption, a mental fog so thick I would stand in the middle of a sentence and lose the end of it. My blood work came back unremarkable. My colleagues told me it was stress, it was perimenopause, it was just aging. And I, a physician with decades of training, believed them for 2 years before I finally opened my grandmother Rachel's notebooks, those small water-stained journals she kept in a language that was half Yiddish and half her own private shorthand. In those notebooks was a system, not a collection of remedies, a system. And within 90 days of applying it, I was transformed. What I want to share with you today is not a secret in the mystical sense. It is a secret in the historical sense, something that was known, practiced, and transmitted faithfully for thousands of years, and that the modern medical world somehow walked right past. Today, I am going to explain from the perspective of both a physician and a granddaughter why Jewish populations consistently outlive nearly every other group on Earth. And I want you to understand from the beginning that what I am sharing today is one piece of a larger architecture, what I call the 7 Jewish Laws of Longevity, a system I have spent 40 years documenting, validating, and teaching. Today we begin. Before we go any further, I want to ask you to do something simple. Write in the comments below, "I am ready to learn." Just those 4 words. Because everything I am about to share requires one thing before all others: the willingness to be a student of your own body. My grandmother Rachel used to say that the wisest women she knew were the ones who never stopped learning. She was still learning at 95. Type it in the comments. I'll wait. Now, let me tell you about a research project that changed how I thought about everything I already knew. In 2012, researchers at Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx, just a few miles from where my grandmother Rachel lived for 30 years, published findings from what they called the Longevity Genes Project. Dr. Nir Barzilai and his team had been studying Ashkenazi Jewish centenarians for years, people who had reached 100 years old or beyond in exceptional health. What they found was extraordinary. These individuals shared specific genetic variants related to cellular repair, inflammation regulation, and what scientists now call autophagy, the body's built-in system for cleaning out damaged cells and regenerating from the inside out. These were not people who had lived perfect, protected lives. Many of them were Holocaust survivors. Many had faced profound stress, poverty, and displacement, and yet their bodies had held. Their biology had resisted what should have destroyed them. I read that research with tears in my eyes, not because it surprised me, because it confirmed something my grandmother had told me at the age of 14. She said, "Sarah, the body wants to survive. Your job is not to fight it. Your job is to work with it the way God designed it to work." At 14, I filed that away as the wisdom of an old woman. At 68, I understand it as the most precise medical statement I have ever heard. Here is what I need you to understand. The researchers found the genetics, but genetics are not destiny. This is something I say to every patient, every student, every woman who comes to me convinced that her mother's health history is her own fate. The science of epigenetics, the study of how our behaviors and environments switch our genes on and off, has transformed medicine in the last 20 years. And what that science shows us is this. The Jewish communities that demonstrate exceptional longevity are not simply born with superior genes. They are living in ways that activate protective genes and suppress destructive ones. They have been doing this systematically and religiously, and I use that word intentionally, for 3,000 years. This is not coincidence. This is a system. Let me be honest with you about something that I think most physicians are afraid to say. The modern healthcare model is extraordinarily good at treating acute illness. If you have a heart attack, you want to be in a hospital with all of modern medicine's resources. But if your goal is to never have that heart attack, if your goal is to be vital, clear-minded, independent, and joyful at 80, modern medicine has very little to offer you. It will tell you to exercise, to eat less, to manage your stress. These are not wrong, but they are profoundly incomplete. And for women over 50 specifically, the system is failing. According to data from the National Institute on Aging, women in the United States over 50 are the fastest growing demographic for chronic conditions, including cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, cognitive decline, and autoimmune disorders. We are living longer than our mothers, but we are not living better. There is a difference that medicine has not figured out how to bridge. My grandmother's generation, the generation of Jewish women who came out of Eastern Europe, who rebuilt their lives after devastation, who carried these practices in their bones because they had no other inheritance. Those women were not just surviving into old age. They were functioning. They were sharp. They were present. At 85, Rachel was still making her own Shabbat dinner. At 92, she was still corresponding by letter with women she had known for 70 years. At 96, she corrected my grammar in 3 languages. The difference was not luck. The difference was the system. What I have come to understand after 40 years is that Jewish longevity is not one thing. It is 7 things practiced together as a coherent and integrated way of moving through life. I call these the 7 Jewish laws of longevity. And I want to be very clear, these laws do not require you to be Jewish. They do not require religious observance in the traditional sense. What they require is a willingness to understand that the most ancient civilizations on Earth figured out things about the human body that we are only now confirming with laboratory equipment. These laws are encoded in the Torah. They are refined in the Talmud. They are systematized in the writings of Maimonides, the 12th century rabbi and physician who wrote medical texts so precise that they are still studied in medical schools today. And they are lived practically and daily in the Friday night kitchens and daily rhythms of Jewish women across 3,000 years of history. Today, I want to teach you the foundation. The reason why, before I can explain any one of the 7 laws in its full depth, I need you to understand the organizing principle that makes all 7 of them work. The Jewish concept that underlies all of this is called Shmirat Haguf. It translates as guarding the body. In Jewish law, this is not a wellness trend. It is a religious obligation. The Talmud, specifically in the Tractate of Berachot, teaches that the body is not ours to mistreat because it was not given to us to own. It was given to us in trust. Tzelem Elohim, we are made in the image of the divine, and to neglect the vessel of that image is, in the Jewish legal framework, a form of desecration. This sounds theological, but the behavioral consequence of this theology is radical. It means that every act of self-care, every decision about what you eat, how you rest, who you spend your time with, how you move your body, is elevated from personal preference to sacred obligation. It removes the negotiation. It removes the I'll start Monday. It places the body in a category of things that are simply not optional to tend. Maimonides, writing in the 12th century in his Mishneh Torah, in the section called Laws of Human Dispositions, states this with a precision that reads like a modern clinical recommendation. He writes that a person should not eat unless they are hungry, should not drink unless they are thirsty, should sleep when the body needs sleep, and stop when the body is rested, and should never wait until illness arrives to begin tending to health. Prevention, he wrote, is the highest form of medicine. He was the personal physician to Sultan Saladin. He was writing in 1198, and what he described is what we now call lifestyle medicine, the fastest growing field in preventive health care in the 21st century. The researchers who study blue zones, those specific regions of the world where people routinely live past 100 in excellent health, identified 5 original locations. But when you examine the behavioral and community characteristics of Jewish populations who demonstrate exceptional longevity, you find something remarkable. They embody nearly every blue zone principle simultaneously, and they have been doing so not because a sociologist recommended it, but because their religious and cultural framework encoded it thousands of years ago. Strong community bonds, regular rest and recovery, a sense of purpose connected to something larger than the individual, a relationship with food that is governed by clear principles rather than impulse, a practice of fasting and metabolic renewal. These are not coincidences. These are the 7 laws practiced in integrated form. Let me tell you what happened the first time I understood this as a system rather than a collection of practices. I was in my late 40s, newly recovered from the health collapse I described earlier. I had begun applying the practices from my grandmother Rachel's notebooks. My energy was returning, my mind was clearing, but what struck me was not any individual result. It was the pattern. These practices were not 7 separate interventions. They were 7 movements of the same symphony. Each one created conditions that made the others more effective. The rest of Shabbat deepened the benefit of the clean eating of kashrut. The community of Chevra amplified the healing of Simcha, the joy. The intermittent fasting traditions of the Jewish calendar sensitized the body in ways that made the herbal and nutritional practices work at a cellular level. This is not mysticism. This is systems biology. And My grandmother knew it instinctively because she had never separated the parts. She had only ever practiced the whole. I want to say something here that I say to every woman who comes to me, frustrated that she has tried everything and nothing has worked. The reason nothing has worked is not because your body is broken. Yeah, it is because you have been applying isolated tools to a systemic problem. You have been trying to fix the symphony by replacing one instrument. The seven laws are not seven options, they are seven requirements. And the populations that demonstrate the most extraordinary longevity, the Ashkenazi centenarians of New York, the communities in Israel with exceptional health outcomes, the Jewish women of my grandmother's generation who never took a pill until their 10th decade of life. They were not selecting from the seven. They were living all seven, woven into the fabric of every week, every season, every meal, every relationship. I will be honest with you. There have been periods of my life when I let the system slip, when the demands of my medical practice and my family crowded out the practices that I knew intellectually were keeping me well. And every single time, within weeks, I felt the consequences. The sleep that began to fragment, the energy that became effortful rather than natural, the mood that flattened in ways I recognized from the patients I had spent years trying to help. I share this not to make you anxious, but to make you understand. This is not theory. I have lived this. I have lived both sides of it. And the difference between the version of me that practices the full system and the version that does not is not subtle. It is the difference between thriving and coping, and I refuse at 68 to merely cope. We are living in a moment when this knowledge is more urgent than it has ever been. Rates of cognitive decline in women over 50 are accelerating. Autoimmune conditions are rising. Hormonal disruption is beginning younger and lasting longer. The medical system is overwhelmed and increasingly unable to offer the preventive guidance that would actually change these trajectories. I am not telling you the system is failing to frighten you. I am telling you because the knowledge I am about to teach you, law by law, is the alternative. It has always been the alternative. It just requires a teacher who is willing to transmit it faithfully. My grandmother Rachel used to say something that I have thought about every day of my medical career. She said, "A sick doctor is a doctor who forgot where medicine came from." She was not speaking metaphorically. She meant that the medicine she trusted, the medicine that kept her alive and vital and clear for nearly a century, was older than any hospital. It was encoded in the texts she had memorized as a girl in Łódź. It was practiced in the rhythms of her week. It was transmitted from her grandmother to her and from her grandmother's grandmother before that. An unbroken chain of knowledge about how the body works and what it needs, carried not in journals, but in lives. I have spent 40 years translating that chain into language that modern women can understand and apply. 7 laws, 7 interlocking practices, each one documented in sacred text, each one validated by current science, each one practiced by the longest-lived communities this world has ever produced. Here is what I want you to take from today. The longevity of Jewish populations is not genetic luck. It is not cultural accident. It is the result of a coherent, integrated system of living that has been practiced with extraordinary consistency across thousands of years. That system is accessible to you, not the religion. Sure, I'm not asking you to change your faith. The practices, the biological and behavioral architecture that produces the results. That is what the 7 laws of longevity are. And beginning with the next teaching in this series, I am going to walk you through them one by one in enough depth that you can begin applying them immediately. In my next teaching, I am going to share the first law, the one my grandmother called the most powerful medicine she ever knew, a practice that requires no supplements, no equipment, and no money. A practice that researchers at Harvard Medical School now confirm activates cellular repair mechanisms in the human body. A practice that Jewish women have used for 3,000 years, and that most women in the modern world have stopped doing almost entirely. What happens in your body when you stop practicing it is something your doctor has probably never explained to you. I will. If today's teaching resonated with you, I ask you to subscribe to this channel and to turn on notifications so that you don't miss what comes next. And please, share this with a woman in your life who needs to hear it, a sister, a daughter, a friend who has been told that how she feels is just aging. This knowledge was never meant to be kept by one person. My grandmother taught it to every woman who sat in her kitchen. I am simply doing the same at a larger table. Until next time, l'chaim, to life.